Betty wears that thing to feel like Rambo. The boy's voice carried across the restaurant just loud enough. Laughter followed as the black tactical glove rolled across the tile floor, kicked away like trash. No one stopped him. No one said a word. Moments later, the door opened again. The old man stepped back in, tall, stiff, deliberate. He moved with a limp and wore a coat that hadn't seen new stitches in years. His eyes scanned the floor until they found it. The glove. He bent forward with effort. And as his sleeve lifted, a rough circle of skin was exposed on his forearm. Not tattooed, but burned into the flesh. Crossed blades over coordinates. A mark meant for men who didn't exist on paper. Someone pulled out a phone. A girl whispered, "What even is that?" No one asked him. No one offered help. He picked up the glove, pressed it tight into his chest, turned toward the outdoor patio. Inside, brunch continued. Plates clattered. Orders flew. Except for one boy, maybe 10, frozen mid-step with his tray still in hand. He didn't laugh, didn't move. He just watched, like he knew this wasn't about the glove. Before we continue, where are you watching from today? This story means more when I know who's listening. I read every comment. Really. The chair scraped softly as he sat, away from the windows near the far wall. The patio was nearly empty. Just 2 tables occupied, one by a couple lost in their phones, the other by a man on a laptop who hadn't looked up once. The sun cast long lines across the tile, and the metal chair groaned quietly under the weight of the years that carried him there. He didn't touch the food yet. Just placed the glove beside the tray like someone placing a photograph before a meal. Inside the restaurant, the laughter continued, muffled by glass but not far enough to forget. He had heard it, all of it. But he didn't react. He adjusted the position of the fork, straightened the paper napkin, then folded his hands over the edge of the table and simply waited. Captain Hank Wallace had learned long ago that time moves differently for people who've seen certain things. For those who've had to crawl across burning sand with a map in their teeth and someone else's blood on their sleeves, brunch time meant something else. He wasn't wearing a uniform, not today. Just a dark olive coat, patched at the shoulder, and a shirt with sleeves rolled up past the wrist. The burned symbol still faintly visible beneath new skin. It had never healed completely, not by accident. They didn't want it to. He didn't come for the discount. He came because this was the restaurant, the one they had passed on a night patrol, half-starved, boots falling apart, radios jammed. His operator, Mendez, had pointed at the neon sign and said, "That's where I'm buying your coffee when we're done with this nightmare." But Mendez didn't come back. And Hank never ordered the coffee. He just returned each year, sat in silence, placed the glove on the table, and waited. Inside, the boy from earlier still stood with his tray, unsure whether to sit or follow. His father called him twice before he moved. Back near the counter, a young waitress with trembling hands approached the manager. Should I take his order again?" The manager shook his head. "No, just let him be." But a minute later, another figure came outside, one of the teens who had laughed earlier. He stood near the old man's table, chewing gum slowly. "Hey," he said with a crooked smile. "Nice glove. What's that supposed to be, huh? Some kind of vet cosplay?" Hank didn't answer. Didn't even look up. He just slid the glove back into his coat pocket. "Didn't think so," the kid muttered, and walked away. From the inside window, the waitress watched it all. Her hands gripped the edge of the sink, and still. Hank said nothing. He reached for his knife, cut a small piece of toast, brought it to his mouth with calm, steady hands, chewed slowly. No bitterness in his face, just presence, the kind that doesn't ask for permission, the kind that remembers more than it tells. The toast was cold, but he ate it slowly, methodically. He wasn't there for flavor. Each bite was a kind of ritual, a way to sit through the present without unraveling into the past. That was the trick, really. How to stay still when so many moments wanted to pull you backward. The wind shifted. One of the patio umbrellas flapped violently. A couple inside glanced over, then went back to their drinks. Hank looked down at the small tray. The eggs were dry, the coffee lukewarm. He didn't mind. To him, this wasn't brunch. This was remembrance. And this table, this seat, was never just a table. It was a checkpoint, a place marked by memory, not by maps. It had been 1973, Delta Zone 4, hostile-controlled hills, a recovery mission under blackout orders. His team had lost radio contact with command, and weather conditions had killed aerial reconnaissance. They'd been assigned to extract a lost fire team trapped near a chemical depot, except it wasn't a fire team. It was a foreign intelligence asset that didn't exist. The men were expendable. The paperwork, redacted before it was ever written. But Hank didn't follow politics. He followed coordinates, and the ones he carried, written inside his glove, led him straight to where they were. They found the men, or what was left of them, 2 hours before the evac chopper arrived. 3 were still alive. One was Mendez. Mendez had been 19, bright, quiet, always adjusting the frequencies on the comms, always sketching little emblems on napkins and canteens. It was his idea to design a personal insignia for the squad, crossed blades through a ring of radio static. "Burn it in," he used to joke. "So when the world forgets us, we can recognize each other." When the depot blew, Hank and Mendez were thrown 30 feet. Hank's arm caught a piece of shrapnel hot enough to brand the skin. Mendez didn't get back up. Hank carried him to the evac zone anyway, just in case. Back in the present, someone tapped on the glass. A woman with sunglasses and a pearl necklace motioned to the waitress. Is he going to be out there all day? It's a bit distracting. The waitress didn't answer. She just nodded and returned to the coffee machine. Inside, the boy from earlier sat with his father. He wasn't eating, just glancing toward the patio again and again, watching. Not sure why it mattered, but knowing somehow that it did. Hank finished the toast. He wiped the crumbs from his lap, pulled out the glove and rested it on the table once more. His hand hovered over it, thumb tracing the same spot near the thumb pad, a frayed stitch repaired 3 times. Inside the lining, folded carefully, was a note. He'd never opened it. Mendez had handed it to him on the chopper before he passed out. "For later," he'd said. But later never came. Each year on Veterans Day, Hank went somewhere Mendez had mentioned. A diner, a road stop, a church, a small-town baseball field. He sat quietly, waited, ate something simple, and left. He never brought stories, never corrected anyone who called him sir without knowing why. He just listened, for echoes, for names he remembered that never made it into history books, for signs that someone still knew they had been there. Back inside, the manager glanced at the clock. Maybe he wouldn't come back next year, he thought. Maybe this was the last time. But outside, at the edge of the table, the glove rested in place. Like a flag, no one had the right to move. He hadn't planned to keep the glove. Back then, it was just protocol. Remove all identifiers, account for every item, secure what could be returned to families. But when Hank tried to hand it over, there was no next of kin listed. Mendez's records were scrambled. His file marked inactive, non-recoverable. So the glove stayed with Hank, folded, quiet, waiting. He kept it in his footlocker for the first 10 years, pulled it out every so often, not to wear, just to hold. Then, after the fire at his house in '86, when he lost nearly everything, it was the only thing he found still intact, singed but whole. The seams had come apart at the thumb, the inner lining was torn, but the note was still there, tucked behind the stitching. He ran his fingers over the envelope, still sealed. He never opened it, not out of fear, not out of guilt, but because some things matter more when they stay unknown. Like the sound of a voice you never recorded, but still remember. Or the look on a friend's face when they said, "I got you," and meant it. The waitress returned to the counter. She watched through the window again. The old man hadn't moved much, just shifted the tray slightly. His eyes were down, not on the food, but on the glove. It was the fourth time she'd seen him that week, always alone, always sitting at the same spot on the patio. She had once asked another server, "Do we know his name?" "Just Wallace, I think," they'd said. "Doesn't talk much, paid cash, quiet." The boy was watching again. From inside, seated with his father, he leaned just enough to keep the man in view. His father was on his phone, not noticing. The boy reached for a napkin and began drawing slowly. Two shapes that almost made no sense to him, a ring and two blades crossing through the center. He didn't know why he was drawing it, but it felt right. Back outside, Hank reached into his coat and pulled out a needle. The stitch was fraying again. He didn't sew like a soldier. He sewed like someone who had to learn the hard way, crude, tight, efficient. Each thread passed through the fabric like it was muscle memory, thumb, pull, knot, trim. He didn't look around, didn't seem aware that anyone was watching, but he was. He always was. You don't spend years in enemy territory without knowing how to read the corners of your vision. A new waitress came out with water. "You okay out here, sir?" He nodded once, just once. She hesitated, then said, "That glove looks like it's been through a lot." He glanced at her. For a second, just a second, his eyes lifted fully. "Yeah," he said, voice dry, gravelly. So did the man who wore it. She didn't know what to say, just smiled awkwardly and left. Back inside, the older waitress, the one who had seen the photo, whispered something into her ear. Something that made her turn back, eyes wide. Hank tied off the last thread, folded the glove once, then again, and placed it carefully, palm down, on the edge of the table. Not for show, not for pity, but because some things, like promises, are heavier than they look. He was halfway through his second sip of cold coffee when the patio door opened. 3 people stepped out. A young man in civilian clothes, straight-backed, crisp fade haircut, broad shoulders under a gray hoodie. With him, a woman in her late 40s and a boy no older than 6, holding a red cap in both hands. They walked past without seeing him, but he saw them. And the second the young man turned back toward the patio, saw the glove, the old stitched patchwork, and the mark on Hank's forearm. Everything about him changed. His eyes froze. His body straightened. He stopped moving, mouth slightly open. His mother looked confused. "Something wrong?" The man shook his head slowly, then nodded once. "That's him," he said under his breath. "That's Captain Wallace, Zulu 6. She blinked. "You mean—" He didn't answer. He was already walking toward the table. Hank noticed the shift in air before the footsteps. It wasn't just the rhythm. It was the silence that followed. When the young man reached the table, he stopped. No introduction, no hesitation. He stood at attention, in the middle of a crowded patio, with brunch plates clinking and wind chimes overhead. He saluted. "Captain Wallace, sir." "It's an honor." Hank looked up. He didn't speak, but his hand slowly reached for the glove, not to hide it, but to turn it outward, palm up. The symbol faced the young man like a badge. "I studied you in training," the soldier said, voice tight with emotion. "Operation Iron Halo, 18 men extracted, no aerial support. You guided evac on foot, through red zones, with 0 visibility." He paused. "My CO said the only reason I made recon unit was because of the protocols you wrote." Inside the restaurant, something shifted. Voices dropped. Chairs paused mid-scrape. People near the window leaned forward. The mother stepped beside her son. She looked at Hank's face, then at the glove, then back at her son. "I know that emblem," she whispered. "Your uncle used to draw it on everything, on his helmet, his canteen." Her voice caught. "Your uncle was Mendez." Hank didn't flinch, but he closed his eyes briefly. The young boy, the same who had watched earlier, now approached the table too, holding the napkin he'd been sketching on. "Is this it?" he asked. "The real one?" Hank looked at him. Really looked. Then, without speaking, he reached into his coat and pulled out something no one had ever seen. A folded envelope, old, weathered, still sealed. He placed it next to the napkin. The mother's hands trembled. That's his handwriting. The manager stepped outside, trying to make sense of the moment. "Sir," he said gently, "if there's been a misunderstanding, I apologize. Your meal is on the house. Please come inside. You can sit anywhere you like." But Hank stood up, took the glove, the envelope, shook his head. "I came for the seat that was promised," he said. "Nothing more." That's when the young man, now visibly trembling, turned to the patio crowd. "This man," he said, voice loud, steady, "is why some of us came back. This man taught us, without ever meeting us, how to move in silence and survive. He didn't fight for medals, he fought for people who didn't get names on walls. And one by one, table after table, people stood. No applause, no camera flashes, just posture, respect, presence. If you believe stories like this deserve to be remembered, and that silent dignity deserves to be seen, subscribe now. We share stories for those the world often forgets. The following Sunday, the patio opened early. The same table near the far wall had a new addition, a small brass plaque, polished and centered. Behind it, inside a weather-sealed frame, sat a single black glove, neatly stitched, palm up. Below it, words engraved in quiet weight. "Reserved for the captain. His silence moved us all." No one asked who wrote it. No one needed to. At 9:47 a.m., Hank Wallace arrived, just like always. Same coat, same cane, same rhythm in his steps. But this time, as he entered the patio, every table was full, yet not one seat was occupied. People stood beside their chairs. Heads lowered slightly. Conversations paused. He walked slowly to the table, touched the plaque with the back of his fingers, sat down, didn't smile, didn't weep. He just took off his cap, placed it on his knee, and breathed. A few minutes later, the boy appeared again, this time with his father. He didn't speak, only extended a napkin, the one with the sketch, a ring with crossed blades. Hank took it gently, folded it, slipped it into his pocket. "I think he would have liked that," he said quietly. The boy nodded. So did Hank. He didn't stay long, just long enough to finish half a coffee, just long enough to leave the envelope beneath the frame, still sealed, still waiting. If this story stayed with you, type "still here" in the comments. And if you haven't subscribed yet, this is your quiet reminder. Thank you for being with us.